Today, I'm joined by three-time Emmy winner Lee Sung Jin, whose second season of Beef takes the show's bruised emotional truth into a world of class anxiety, surveillance, and slow burn dread inside an elite country club. What could possibly go wrong? Sonny, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
What I loved is season one detonated from a public act of road rage, but this season is built around something, I guess, much quieter, in a way, more poisonous. What excited you about shifting the beef from something overt and immediate to something perhaps more passive aggressive and initially socially strategic?
Yeah, for me, I think a lot about my favorite like musicians and bands and I just remember like in my 20s when like my favorite band would just copy their first album and kind of just do the same formula for their second. I definitely start to lose interest, and I think about my favorite artists that I've stuck with over decades, and you think about a band like Radiohead, and they've just taken some huge swings. And obviously, don't not trying to compare myself to Radiohead, but I think that is such a good North Star for artists, to want to try to do something different. And so when you think about season one, if we were to just kind of repeat sort of an overt, aggressive rage, uh, really the story math of the domino that follows starts to look very similar. And so, doing the inverse felt very interesting to us, where there's nothing more passive than witnessing something and then letting that kind of brew and build as your life circumstances start to change. And really the generational divide was the genesis for the show, where much like season one, I had a real life incident inspire this season. I had overheard a neighborhood spat, but it wasn't until I was retelling the story to um, people younger than me that I was like, oh, wait, we're different. Because the younger generation was all like aghast and concerned and asking if I called 911. Whereas all my elder millennial friends and older, they just kind of shrugged and were like, who amongst us hasn't screamed those words in that order? So,
So
uh,
true.
yeah. So yeah, I think it was really fun for us as writers to get to explore kind of different shapes, I guess.
Yeah, I also read that you had early conversations with the cast and were incredibly open to, instrumental, I guess, in making the characters feel as bespoke to each of them. Especially once the four leads were in place, what changed in the writing at all, or what deepened in your understanding of who these people were?
Well, that's why I tried not to do too much writing until we have our cast. I think we just had an early draft of the first episode, and we were very lucky in that we were able to have our four leads attached so early, because then yeah, I can have those very honest conversations and start to mine a lot of the textures of the show. I think as writers, we often can do a good job with story math and laying down, kind of the narrative chord progression, so to speak. But then nothing's more ingenious than life itself. So then the textures you put on those chords, I think, come from real life conversations. And also that, I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't have a cast that was willing to go there. These actors are so talented that they could have just, showed up, clocked in, clocked out, and given great performances.
Yeah.
But I mean, truly, every single one across the board, from the four leads to our two Korean legends to the supporting cast, they all gave hours of their life over text, over Zoom, over phone calls, to just constantly be giving us new textures to play with. And that is something that doesn't happen all the time. So I'm very, very, very grateful.
Yeah, it kind of sounds exhilarating when you get that kind of vibe and connection. you can really fly. And it's so obvious that on Beef season two, that absolutely happened. I found this season so compelling. I smashed it so fast. I could not wait to just keep going and keep escalating, keep escalating. And I noticed by episode four, which you directed, it feels like a real hinge point for the season, like where things become much more personal, psychologically intense. And what I've noticed is it's really resonating with audiences. I think it's the top rated episode on IMDb, for example. Why do you think this particular episode has connected so strongly?
I think it's unfortunately due to real world feeling so similar, you know. I that episode was born out of a real life experience that happened during the writing season, where I experienced a 10 plus hour stint at the ER, and the whole time I had my notes app out, just kind of writing down everything that was happening. And I ended up writing the first draft, in a day or two. Obviously the writer's room then helps in punching it up, but um, yeah, to me that episode is a documentary, and that's why it was also really exciting for me to get to direct it because so much of what I experience is all up here. So to be able to just directly go to HODs and be like, well, no, I think there should be this amount of aging on the wall, and the liquid in the chairs was actually like, this color, and the condescension in the doctor's voice was actually this level of condescension, and so uh, it really became just trying to remember as closely as I can the feeling of that experience, and whether everyone's memories are very distorted and subjective. So I'm sure maybe my subjective lens of it is slightly distorted, but I'm sure I know that for so many people going through harrowing experiences like that in our broken healthcare system, um, I had a feeling they might feel the same, and it's been very interesting seeing the reactions because I often see comments from viewers in other countries who leave comments like, well, surely this can't be real. This is far too broad and crazy, right? And then
Yeah.
you have like 100 American viewers being like, nope, this just happened to me yesterday. Nope, my father is in the hospital and that literally happened to me right now. And it's honestly ridiculous because I have good health insurance. I am privileged, and still the system fails us. And I certainly don't want to ever come across like we are blaming the doctors or nurses involved because they're clearly trying their best. They're overworked, underpaid. Um, really, insurance providers have kind of overtaken the system and has made this like a true nightmare hellscape to navigate. And we live in late stage capitalism, as the show shows. And so, yeah, that's why I wanted to really do a careful job with that episode, to capture those emotions as accurately as I could, knowing that so many other Americans are going through the same thing.
Yeah, it's so evocative, so meticulous. The opening sequence is built around these, to me, fluid tracking shots as Ashley's waiting. And then it snaps into something much more internal once she sees Eunice's messages. It's excruciatingly tense. What were you trying to establish, I guess, in those first few minutes, and where did you want the audience to feel that shift from like the external chaos and into her private spiral?
Yeah, I think for so much of that is trying to think about your own self and distill and deconstruct how one felt when doing something similar. Like, you know, uh, ashamed to admit that in my youth, have gone through phones, or also vice versa have happened,
Yeah.
and it is certainly immature. It is definitely filled with shame, and so I think it's I think no one does that like proud. You know what I mean? And so, Kaylee did such an incredible job conveying the nervousness and the apprehension, but also the exhilarating thrill of like, oh, when you go looking, you almost like want to find something, you know? And so uh then as a filmmaker, the job is just to like try to capture every little thing that Kaylee's giving. And so making sure, you know, our close-ups are the right lens and at the right height, capture everything like and in post, you know, so much with our mix team is incredible. Making sure Austin's voice feels like kind of harmless and silly at first as he's offering Gator grades to other people in the lobby and then having it feel
God.
more tense as it comes closer. And you know, and then Austin and then Charles then takes that and has fun with it as he like twirls his like Gatorades in his hand and then Phineas's score helps so much as like he builds
Uh,
the tension of that scene incredibly. And then honestly, it even comes down to our VFX team of making sure nothing takes me out of a show more when I'm looking at the VF phone inserts. And the OS just doesn't feel like your own phone. Like we are so accustomed to our phones that any like font size difference or even like the OS sitting in the phone frame a
yeah,
little weird,
it's
we
ugh,
feel it, you know?
yes.
And so we spend an inordinate amount of time with the VFX team, just making sure that like the bubbles coming in feels right, and then like you know going to recently deleted and clear like all of that has to feel so true in order for the audience to just sit back and know that they're in good hands and just focus on the emotion that Kaylee is playing in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, she's going through her phone. It's probably not life or death, but then when she's on the table about to go through a life or death experience, she wants to make sure that everyone knows, just to let him know that I was going through his phone. And it's like, what? Oh my
Yes.
God. Yeah, I really felt that. Um,
Thank you.
there's a strong sense early on as well that, just as a follow up with what you said a bit earlier, that we're observing behavior, scanning the space, clocking movement around Austin and Ashley, and then at certain pressure points, you start pushing in, pulling focus, almost intruding on them both. How do you decide when to abandon that observational distance and impose something more subjective on the frame?
Yeah, I think that was definitely a challenge season two compared to season one because season one just naturally only has two perspective characters. So when you cover a scene, it's just always Amy's scene or Danny's scene, and you can just you know plan your shot coverage around that. Season two, you have exponential more characters, not just four, but like arguably like 6 to 8 perspective characters, and so then the handoff of perspective, you always want to do elegantly. As a director, what I sometimes bristle at is when like a scene is just kind of hosed down and you know that like they just kind of like found it in post, like what who to cut and when to cut to who when. And uh, I think for us, we try to be a little bit more intentional with our shot coverage. So an example is, you know, the hospital scene when the doctor visits Ashley and tells her that she's completely fine, and Ashley thinks that the pain scale is like letterbox and that 5 is average, which is genuinely something that I thought for the longest time. And you know the shot selection in that scene actually it starts being Ashley's scene where at the beginning of the scene when they're discussing hot pockets, you know, we're over Kaylee's shoulder to Austin, and then when we're on Kaylee, we're clean onto Kaylee, and so you naturally feel like you're more with Kaylee's character, and then it's not until the doctor shows up and then she has the letterbox statement where it starts to feel like, oh, wait, is Ashley crying wolf? And that's when we stay in kind of that observational two shot, like you're saying, and that two shot pushes to become Charles's single. And that then is the way that we're passing off perspective. And then once we're tight on Austin, we're starting to feel his frustration. Like we're
Mm.
like, oh, we were with Ashley, and then now we're with Charles, and we're feeling like, ugh, like Ashley is problematic. And so then, you know, as she talks, she's soft focus. You know, we rack for her Oppenheimer line, but then ultimately we're racking back to Charles as he gets up. And so, you know, it was really fun kind of thinking about those challenges and how to do that in an interesting way. Uh, and then sometimes we broke that language too, where the very next scene when he's on the phone with Eunice, you know, something I learned from Jake season one is he is very perspective driven, and so you know, normally he likes to stay with a character, and you know, oftentimes he would probably if he were doing that scene, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but you know, what the show would normally do is either Steady or Dolly leading and following, and just to stay with
Yeah,
Charles, and on the day, like me and James Laxton, and this is a testament to our the lovely working relationship we have. We both felt like, oh, like we do this all the time, and like, is there any other way to make this more interesting? And as we were talking, we were like, well, this does feel like the point of the episode where things start to feel surreal. So what if we go a little wider with the lens and we have it at the end of the hallway? And Charles can feel super far away as he enters on the phone, and he almost has to do this like long march to something that almost feels fated, like a guided hand
yeah,
directing him to like this ominous point. And it's not until he landed by the camera that we do a small pull to reveal the vending machine. And now suddenly the vending machine is all red. And so you know, those were little ways in our filmmaking to kind of change up the language I think that we had become accustomed to over season one and start to play with some of these very subjective moments more.
yeah. Look, the combination of your work, James Laxton, of course, incredible cinematographer, and of course Jake Schreier and his contribution on this show, second to none. But I love it. I do love how you broke some of the rules of beef in this episode, and that long shot in the hallway. I was like, wow, so impressive.
Thank you.
Um, so the episode then shifts to Josh and Lindsay's home, where Ashley spikes the jug with her blood. And to me, it lands as both calculated and completely unhinged. It's one of those moments where the show, to me, tips from anxiety into something way darker. So, how did you
Yeah.
approach directing that beat so it feels intentional rather than impulsive, but also quite still deeply disturbing?
Yeah, I think because it's so disturbing, we wanted to feel the lead up I feel almost composed, you know. We find that a lot on the show where if the writing is doing something, then almost everything else has to counterbalance it. If you go too heavy on top of what the writing is doing, it sort of tips the tone a little too far. Uh, you know, the like Fincher is the master at this, where his shots are so clean and it feels so composed that the darkness of you know something like Zodiac feels more digestible and almost more uncomfortable because it's so clean and pristine, and so you know. Leading into Josh's house, we had these wides that were like pushing at a very steady pace. You know, you see Josh and Lindsay just doing their like normal uh go pee Burberry and he's off to the car, but it is you're like, wait, why is the show just staying in this wide? And then you see the car come by, and then suddenly you see the creak, and then Ashley's head poke it, and then her
Mm.
pop up from the rock, which you know, Kaylee's so amazing to work with. You know, we did so many takes of her popping up just because we wanted to get like the right feel. And then, you know, once inside, you know, we made sure to we shot those pieces over many days because you know, James and I wanted to make sure that we were shooting it during golden hour because there is something very like almost like clean and refreshing feeling about this dark move she's about to do, this very cathartic expression of her rage. And so her going through the house and telling Burberry that she's gonna, you know, raise him as her own and destroy his family and, you know, going through the house. There is something very kind of slick feeling about those moments. And you know, in post, we were very happy that we made those choices because, you know, one thing we found with the end moment, when Burberry ultimately walks out of the house, uh, I did do coverage of Burberry just in case. Like there is like a tighter coverage by the door as Burberry's face pokes out of the thing. Um, but it ultimately when you try it, you're like, oh no, like this clean wide thing is really working because just to stay in that wide as the door just like creaks, shut and he pokes through. There's something very, very satisfying of that as the needle drop hits its beat. Um, and that's all stuff that I don't know we would have done season one, and I think it was really, really fun to play with this time.
Oh, I can only imagine. It's such a killer episode, honestly, Sonny. I really, really enjoyed it. My final question is more of a general one because it's about Beef generally. What really struck me is that you seem to have a lot of empathy for these characters, even when they're behaving terribly. Even like Chairwoman Park and the character played by Song Kang-ho, which is one of my favorite actors of all time. It never excuses them. But it never feels like it's judging them either. I'm just wondering, how do you think about that balance when you're building the characters, especially when so much of the story is driven by shame and self-deception and doing really horrible things to each other?
Yeah, I think it's very easy to judge. There's this great quote, like we judge others by their actions and we judge ourselves by our intentions. And I think oftentimes when we watch film and TV, we're doing the same thing. We're like, oh, like that person's despicable. But then, you know, I think hopefully sometimes the role of storytelling is like, well, that despicable thing, that Carl Jungian shadow, is that making you feel that way because there's a part of you that also sometimes thinks like that? Maybe you wouldn't do that, but the root of it is there, and maybe it manifests itself differently. And so, I think in order to write these characters honestly, you always try to just come at it with a clean slate of not wanting to judge them. Obviously, like in the real world, there are laws and guidelines so that there is judgment for behavior. But I think when writing characters, if they're going to be three-dimensional, you have to be in their body and judge yourself by your intentions as that character. And
Yeah,
so even someone like Chairwoman Park, she was born a baby at some point, and
yeah,
she didn't know any better. She was pure at heart. And somewhere along the way, all this stuff happened, and she's making these choices. So, and that's something that also I think over time I've learned a lot from these incredible actors that I've gotten to work with, where the best actors, they never judge their character. They wouldn't be able to be on set performing if they were like, oh, this guy that I hate this guy that I'm being. They wouldn't be able to sustain it for the length of the shoot. So it's been really cool to see all these actors find their way into these darker characters because they do try to find where the light is. That's how they get in there. And hopefully myself as a writer and the other writers in the room, hopefully we're giving these actors not too much of a difficulty finding in because we're finding the empathy in the writing. But really, that's ultimately why we landed on the top shot as well for the end of the season is, you know, we were originally as scripted ending with Cherwin Park by the grave on an extreme close-up as ants crawled over her face. That's what was scripted, and that's what we edited, and multiple
wow,
network cuts. And it just wasn't working because I think when you end with this billionaire character, as much as you try to humanize her, like for me anyway, I was like, I do not care. Like I don't want the end moment to be me sympathizing with this billionaire. And so we had the fortune of reshooting some episode five stuff. And Jake, as an EP on the show, was like, Sonny, are you sure you don't want to like squeeze something in to try and like come up with something for the end moment? And so I thought about it, and I was like, well, it'd be nice to do a top shot again, but flip it on its head. Different than the finale last season. And I have these samsara paintings that I've saved on my phone over many years because, I love thinking about that a lot for my own spiritual journey. And I texted Jake, Grace, our production designer, Olga, our costume designer, and James, our DP, and Gavin, our AD. And I was like, can we do this? And I sent them the painting. And they were like, what does this mean? And I was like, this samsara painting.
Yeah,
And they're like, okay. And then, that's the joy of collaborating when suddenly Grace is like, well, I could like create like the same like dividers and maybe I pull some furniture from storage. And then Olga's like, I mean, I still have all the wardrobe for the extras. What if on like the outer circle, like it's like, extras living their lives? And then James and Jake are like, oh, there's this one drone we could use that like can do the 360 turn better than others. And then suddenly we're cooking. And we put that together in like a week. And then the next thing you know, we're on set with this kind of like surreal minimal version of Samsara. And I always knew the show was going to end with that Phoenix song, and so we were able to have the Phoenix song playing on set and just kind of like time everything perfectly.
that Samsara reference at the end blew my mind. It was so perfect. I'm really glad that you thought of that and threw it in because it really works. Sunny, season two, what a great album. What a great follow up. I love this band. I want to see more. Thank you so much for
Thank
your
you.
time today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.